Oh my god, y'all. I wasn't gonna film today, and the universe knows it. There's a fly in here that will not leave me the fuck alone. I just had the fight of my life getting my tablet to recognize my mic, which it has been recognizing fine for several videos. This time it was like, microphone, never heard of her. We don't know her here. So, yes, hopefully nothing else is gonna go wrong. Fingers crossed. I am going to be asking my tablet to both show me a web page and record my audio at the same time. Let's see if this is a disaster. But the reason I wanted to film today is I just finished a book called Paladin's Grace by Kingfisher, who I have been loving Kingfisher's books, her style, her stories. They just all seem to be like exactly for me. You know, when you find that author who just like speaks to you, who like is exactly the style and the type of characters that you want to read about. I felt that way about Tamara Pierce, and I feel that way about Kingfisher, or so I thought. I knew it was going to happen, that I was going to encounter a book by Kingfisher that I didn't like as much, but I didn't think it was going to be this one. And I'm really disappointed because it's a whole series, and I was looking forward to having like a series of hers that maybe I could get back into series again, because I'm not really into series very much as an adult. But anyway, let's talk about it. Let us find out what disappointed me about this book. I have the synopsis here on Goodreads on my tablet, which is also supposed to be recording my voice. So we'll see how this goes. All right, so Paladin's Grace. Stephen's god died on the longest day of the year. 3 years later, Stephen is a broken paladin, living only for the chance to be useful before he dies. But all that changes when he encounters a fugitive named Grace in an alley and witnesses an assassination attempt gone wrong. Now the pair must navigate a web of treachery beset on all sides by spies and poisoners, while a cryptic killer stalks one step behind. So first of all, I knew this was going to be romance. I just didn't know how heavily romance it was going to be, and I am not a romance girly. So know that about me going in. If you love a romance, a fantasy romance that is not what I would call romantasy, like we have romantasy, it's over here, it's doing its thing, it's being its own thing. I wouldn't call this romantasy, I would call this a fantasy romance, because I feel like in a lot of romantasy, modern romantasy, the fantasy side doesn't really matter. It's just a set dressing, it's just a hat that the book is wearing, the genre is wearing, so that the author doesn't have to be realistic about anything. But in a fantasy romance, the fantasy aspect is very important to the story, and it is in this, but it's still much more heavily romance than I was anticipating. I didn't know quite what I was getting into with these, because Kingfisher in the past, the books that I've read of hers that I've loved, A House with Good Bones and Nettle and Bone, a lot of bone names now that I think about it, but her books that I have read so far have tended to either not have a romance entirely, or the romance is a side plot, and usually I've liked it. I tend to like her romances. I had Thornhedge I read recently, and I thought the romance in that was like so sweet. I loved the romantic interest. He was just the kindest, sweetest man. But that type of romance, even though it was a sort of main part of the story in Thornhedge, didn't overpower the story. Unfortunately, in Paladin's Grace, and I've coming to find out because other friends have read this series, the entire series is the romance first and the plot of the book second, and unfortunately that's not for me. I had hoped that, like, because I liked the way that Kingfisher has written romance as a side plot, that I would like her writing romance as more of a main plot. I didn't. So, yes. And also, as we will talk about, it was my least favorite, or one of my least favorite types of romance plot. So, okay. So we have Stephen and we have Grace. They are sort of equal main characters. We go back and forth in their points of view. We start out with Stephen though, and he's really interesting. I did like him better as a character than I liked Grace. I felt like Grace was a little bit more poorly characterized, but Stephen is a paladin, and he's a paladin of a dead god. He is a paladin of the, what is it, God of Blades? God of Steel, the Saint of Steel. And for some reason, we don't find out why, at least in this book, his god dies. Oops. And that makes all of his paladins, who are like berserker warriors, but like kind berserker warriors, like lawful good berserker warriors, which you don't see very often. They all go into a berserk, and most of them don't survive because they kill a bunch of people and then they are killed. But Stephen and a few of his friends survive, and they are taken in by the rat god and the Temple of the Rat, which I love. I'll try to get into that when I get into world building, but I love everything to do with like the Order of the Rat. But he's taken in, he and his friends are taken in, and he like lives in fear of going berserk again and killing people. Because like, here's the thing about Stephen and his friends, they are, like I said, lawful good. They only want to kill bad people. And previously when their god was alive, that's what they were doing. But now they could get sent into a rage if they have heightened emotions of any kind, or at least Stephen thinks so. He's like very like cautious, while at the same time just being a giant brick of a cinnamon roll. I don't really like his archetype as a like male lead. He is just the sort of giant muscular guy that we're just seeing over and over again, but his personality makes up for it because he's just kind of like this big, dumb sweetheart. Like, he's not that dumb, but like from the outside he seems like it because he's very quiet. He doesn't talk a lot. He just kind of like, he is sort of the human embodiment of a dog with its head stuck in a chair. Just sort of like, oh, okay, I guess this is my life now. You know, that vibe is Stephen all the way. And for the most part, when he was by himself or he was bouncing off of any other character except his romantic interest, I really liked Stephen. There was a scene at the beginning where Stephen is escorting a healer through like a very bad part of town, and there is a murderer on the loose chopping people's heads off. And the healer is like, oh no, it's fine. Everybody loves the Temple of the Rat. We are friends to everybody. No one here in this town would ever hurt me. Even the murderers know not to hurt me. And Stephen is like, oh my God, would you please be more cautious? Like, the dynamic of Stephen and this healer were so good that I got excited. I'm like, is this what the book is going to be? Is this going to be just like Stephen escorting this man through town? Unfortunately, it was not, and that was just the beginning of the book, and it doesn't really happen again, and it made me really sad because I instantly fell in love with their dynamic. I was like, this is amazing, and I want this to be the book. But that was before I realized how heavy of a romance we were going into. Now we have Grace. I didn't really like Grace as a character. She felt a little bit meh to me. She is that sort of classic, adorkable, slightly clumsy girl who has trauma. I will say that of these characters, something that definitely sets them apart from the normal fantasy romance that you see going on right now is that they are both whole adults. They are like in their 30s. They have pasts, they have history, they have a romantic history, and we're not sitting here pretending that they don't, and I love that. I love that aspect of like, we don't have Stephen saying, I've never loved anybody before you and I will never love anybody as much as you. Like, no, don't be stupid. I do like that aspect of this book as a romance. I do like some aspects of the way that this book handles romance. Just I don't like the main couple together, and I don't like the type of romance, the trope that we went with. So, but Grace, she's a perfumer, and I do love about her that she has a super sniffer. I also have a super sniffer. I'm gonna detect a scent before anybody else notices it. My husband can never cheat on me because, and he has acknowledged this, because I would literally sniff it out. Like, he could shower and I would still be like, what's that smell on you? I can tell what people have eaten, I can tell where people have been, I can tell if there's a gas leak in the house before anybody else notices it. So in that aspect, I related really well to Grace, and I've never seen another character who like had a strong sense of smell as a character trait. And I really liked that. And I loved how smell played such an important part in her life. Every time she entered a room, rather than like first describing the room visually, we would describe what she smelled, and then we get the visual description. She could be overwhelmed by smells, like so relatable to me. And probably nobody else, but I liked it. And it made sense that she was a perfumer because like she noticed smells. I did get annoyed, like she notices that Stephen and all of the paladins smell like gingerbread, and she finds out later why, but it drives her crazy. Like, why do you smell like gingerbread? But it was a little bit repetitive. You know, it's one of those things where the author is like, here's a interesting factoid about the love interest, and the main character is going to notice it 12 million times. And it's like, okay, like dial that back. Dial it back. She can notice it, she can be infuriated by it, whatever, but we don't need it quite so often that Steven smells like gingerbread. So I liked the idea of Grace as a character. She was also a curvy girly. She was also like very like not a warrior or a fighter. She was definitely like, she's gonna get out of that situation by fleeing if at all possible. So I liked the aspect of her, but put together into a character, she was just so nothing to me. I wanted her to like have wants of her own, anything really. She just wants to run her shop. She has a friend who is a spy master who I think gets to be a main character in a future book. And her friend is interesting, but we don't get like a lot of her. But her friend is basically pushing Grace to do everything that Grace does. Grace has absolutely no ambitions of her own. She doesn't really ever want anything, even as the story goes on. Even when she's interested in Steven, she doesn't want him enough to pursue him, enough to do anything about it herself. And that's like, on the one hand, I get it, because like I am also struggling as an author to write characters who aren't like bombastic main characters. We are seeing so many lead characters nowadays who are good at everything. They always succeed. Even if other people think that they can't succeed, the main character is just constantly proving them wrong from page one. They're good at fighting, talking, thinking, everything. And the only one who's ever allowed to be better than them at anything is the hyper-masculine male lead. So that's not the character I'm interested in writing, and I can tell that that's not the character that T. Kingfisher's interested in writing either. However, I would have liked it if Grace just had a couple of things that she wanted for herself. I didn't even need it to be like, oh, she wants to go impress the prince, and that's what she's doing. Like, give her a couple things that she herself is striving for, because having her as a character who like really just wants to stay out of the spotlight, which is fine, wants to hide, wants to just go about her business is fine, but she still needs some personal wants and needs that we see her striving towards, even if they don't necessarily connect to the plot, although it'd be good if they did. Like, have her just be on a constant search for rare ingredients and not give a fuck what anybody else does. Like, do that. There was one scene where she went out hunting for some ingredients that she needed. She brought Steven along so they could have a whole romantic moment, and they find a clue. But she finds the clue by accident. But I did enjoy that scene more because it was Grace being like, I am going out hunting for this ingredient. You can come or you cannot. I am going out after this ingredient. And I was like, yes, that's all I want, is for Grace to have something that she wants and go do it. But she only did that once. So Grace, for me, just like, I wish that her personality was stronger. Her personality is avoidant, and that does make her a tough character for me to like, unfortunately. Which is hilarious because I also kind of write that type of character sometimes. Pot, kettle, but at the same time, I mean, I can learn from this. Like, that I needed Grace to have something, anything that she was driving towards personally. And so I need to remember that to give that to my lead characters who are less the bombastic leader type. Anyway, I've talked a lot about Grace. We also have our spy master friend. Don't get a lot from her, but she seems cool. She's very Leliana coded. I was actually kind of picturing her as Leliana, even though that's not quite like the person that she was. That's not how she was described, although I do think she was a redhead. I can't remember. But I was definitely picturing Leliana, spy master Leliana. She's in her spy master era. We also have like the other paladins. They are all going to get their own stories and their own romantic interests in later books, but we do introduce them now, and honestly, I had a really hard time telling them apart. I don't have much to report on that front. I will say that Grace has a pet. I loved it. It's a civet, a civet cat that has been domesticated, and they keep calling it like cat weasel or sometimes just weasel. So I was honestly picturing a ferret most of the time, and I was okay with that because it did behave a lot like a ferret. If you don't know, I own ferrets, so I'm a ferret fan. So having a book where there is a pet character who is ferret-like just filled me with joy. You know I love an animal in a story, and also the ferret cat thing lives, so don't go into this book fearing that it is going to die. Another character that I really liked was there was a like high priestess or like mother or something like that from the Temple of the Rat who is kind of in charge of wrangling the paladins. I loved her. She's so snarky. She's so like cool and confident, and like I had a very clear like image of her in my head. Just the constant eye rolling as she deals with these people. I love her. And there is a lawyer who is a non-binary character, and I loved them as well. I was really worried at a certain point in the book that they were going to turn out to be a villain of some kind, that they were going to be in on whatever was happening, and I was like, don't do it. No, I love them. I love them so much. The only thing that I was like, is that when the lawyer character doesn't really come up much until the end of the book, when there's like a trial, and Grace meets this person and instantly knows to use they them pronouns. And I don't know how, because as far as I know, Grace was never introduced to this person. This person did not introduce themselves with they them pronouns, so how did Grace just know to use they them pronouns for this person? It took me a second to be like, wait, couldn't this lawyer just introduce themselves as like, hey, this is my name, they, them? You know, it would have been that easy to like just normalize it in this world that this person might lead with their pronouns. A thought. I mean, some people might like that Grace just intuited it, but like how? Because we don't have any other non-binary characters. It's not like a really seemingly like a common thing that they encounter. Like, is this person just so androgynous looking that Grace automatically knew to call them by they, them pronouns? Anyway, I'm overthinking it, but I really liked this character a lot. Like, I want this character to be a main character. Forget the paladins, I want the lawyer. I want the lawyer. Let's give them a romantic interest, please. Maybe they do. Maybe in a future book they do. I don't know, because I'm probably not going to keep reading the series. All right, so those are the characters. Some I loved, some I didn't. What's the plot? Well, there's the romance, which is center stage, and then there is the murder mystery plot. We kind of have two things going on at the same time. So in the poor side of town, a murderer is going around and chopping people's heads off, and all they are finding are the heads. They're not finding the bodies. WTF is going on. So that's one. And then two, there's an assassination attempt against a foreign prince who is visiting, and it's a poisoning. And so Grace gets wrapped up in that because people are trying to like pin it on her because she's a perfumer, and they think that perfumer, poisoner, close enough. I guess they both start with P. You know, they both mix ingredients, and therefore Grace must be involved somehow. They're just trying to use her as a scapegoat. I don't know how they decided on her as a scapegoat, but that's what they're trying to do. So Grace is just kind of vibing along, but she keeps encountering Steven, and he's not really trying to solve the mysteries either, but he keeps kind of encountering the mystery, and so he's like reluctantly solving the mystery because people he cares about could be in danger, so he will try to solve it if he encounters a clue. Again, these characters are pretty passive when it comes to kind of everything, but especially like there's a murderer going around. There's like two murderers going around. There's a poisoner, and there is somebody lopping the heads off of people. And neither of our characters are terribly concerned. Steven is more concerned. Grace is like 0% concerned about the guy who's chopping heads off, even though he is, I think, doing it like on her side of town. Oh, also there is this enemy like church, the Church of the Hanged Mother, who are just awful people. They exist to be awful people. There's not really any nuance to them. They're just the bad paladins, the bad ones. So they come around to be a problem, but they are in charge of like murderers and poisoners, and they basically just try to find reasons to like hang or burn people at the stake or behead people, you know, that sort of thing. Bad juju. They are not complex, and I wish that they were a little bit more complex, but maybe they do start to get fleshed out as the books go on. I don't know. They're just right now around to be antagonistic and a problem for Steven and his Order of the Rat. So let's talk about the romance plot, though, because it's my least favorite, or one of my least favorite of all time. And this, I fully acknowledge that this is taste. This is taste-based. What I'm about to tell you might make you want to run out and pick up this book right now, and I wouldn't blame you. So the type of romance that this is the mutual pining. The only obstacle to them getting together is themselves. And I hate that type. I hate it so much. I need there to be something else that's preventing them from getting together, because we are in both of their points of view. Like, if you're going to do this mutual pining, the only thing keeping them apart is themselves, I need it to only be in one point of view. I need to not know for certain that the other person could just get together, like putting my fingers together over and over again like they're going to be a couple. I need to not know that. Because if I know that, if I am in both of their points of view and I see them both just being idiots, they are pining after each other. They are lusting after each other. There's a lot of lusting in this book, which I was not prepared for. As an asexual, cannot relate. But these two are thirsty for each other and they want to be jumping each other's bones like all the time. We are in both of their points of view, so we know that. We know that the attraction is so mutual and so horny. But both of them are doing that stupid thing where they're like, oh, he doesn't like me. Oh, I can't be with her because, oh, I've misinterpreted. I thought that kiss was something else. Oh, I thought they were... I hate it so fucking much. It's like the miscommunication trope, which is one of my least favorite tropes. I just want to bash their stupid heads together and be like, you... like each other. Will you get together? You know, I'm very direct about romance, all right? I don't fuck around. Like, me and my husband, I was the one who asked him out. I'm not messing around. I can tell you like me. Do you want a date? You know? So I have no patience for any of that, do they really like me? It's like, just ask, you idiots. And so, like, I understand that some people love the mutual pining. The only thing keeping them apart is each other. But it drove me crazy. It was also a very adorkable version of that, where it's just like, just silly little mistakes and like constantly being interrupted or misinterpreting this or that gesture from each other while being just so adorkable. And I was like, I can't handle this. I can't handle this. And it's most of the book. It wasn't, they got together at like something like the 75% mark. I forgot to check exactly when they got together, but they did get together within the book, but it took them a long time. I was so sick of their bullshit. When they did get together, though, I will say this. I actually thought that their sex scene was well done. I, dare I say, liked their sex scene. Not in the way that some people probably like a sex scene, because, hello, again, asexual. But I thought it was well written. It was well crafted. If I ever write a sex scene someday, that's the type of sex scene I want to write. Because, like, first of all, they were super communicative. Love that. They would say, "Ooh, I like that. No, I don't like that." They would listen to each other. So often in these like sex scenes, the guy just does things and the woman just loves them, whether she's ever experienced it or not. But like Grace has had sexual experience before and she knows what she likes and doesn't like. And she tells Stephen to stop doing something she doesn't like. And he listens and says, "Oh, okay, do you like this instead?" And she does. And I love that communication. Like, 1,000 out of 10 for this sex scene. Adults having sex for the first time, figuring each other out, just like so wholesome, so non-toxic. I loved it. And also just the way that it was written, rather than all of this stupid language. I love that T. Kingfisher managed to write this in a way that it was extremely clear what they were doing, but without ever having to like name the genitalia or use stupid names for the genitalia. You knew exactly what acts were going on and could picture what was happening without like any messy, horny details. Does that make sense? It made the sex scene just so sweet and so wholesome. And I know there's so many people out here who are like, I'm here for a raunchy, horny, detailed sex scene. But I'm like, that's not me. So as an asexual, if I have to read a sex scene, this one. It was honestly beautiful, and it's the kind of sex scene that I would write if I ever get up the nerve to write a sex scene. So, taking my lessons from this, very much so. So anyway, the plot. They do solve the murder. Both things get solved. Again, the beheading murders get solved a lot more through the actions of the characters. The other one, the poisoning thing, really not through the actions of the characters. It just sort of sorts itself out, which again, disappointing to me. I understand that this is a romance and the romance is in the forefront, but like, I feel like we didn't even really super need the poisoning subplot, except for it was a reason to get Grace arrested and then have the trial and break out of jail and all of that stuff. I get why it happened, but like it resolved itself basically, and then everything was just fine through no effort of the characters. They did do more work solving the murder thing with the beheadings. I'm not going to tell you what it is, but I will say that I didn't love what it turned out to be, because this world, while obviously a fantasy world, very much, there are gods, there is magic, it's a fairly low magic setting. Magic doesn't come up a lot. But then the thing that it turns out to be is a very magical scenario, and I was not prepared. Like, it's definitely one of those mysteries that you couldn't solve on your own because, like, you're not given enough information. And the tone of the whole book didn't fit, in my opinion. The tone of, like, the world building of the whole book did not fit, in my opinion, with the ending, with the what the murderer turned out to be, what or who the murderer turned out to be. We even kind of got introduced to another species that apparently lives in their world, the gnolls, who I didn't even remember once being mentioned until one was just randomly there in a scene as though they have always been there, and I was like, oh, okay. And that does kind of lead me on to world building. The world building is pretty shallow in the fact that the characters live in this world and they don't care to explain it. So you just kind of have to infer, which for the most part is my preferred way to do it. I don't like big dumps about the magic or the world or anything like that. I don't want to know and I don't care. If the character doesn't need it and they don't care about it, I don't need to know it. And that tends to be how I world build as well. But this was even more bare bones than even I like. Like, some things would happen and I'd be like, oh, I didn't know that was a possibility. But I guess it is. Like, gnolls existing, I guess. Everything felt fairly grounded, aside from, like, the gods and their paladins and, like, some of the abilities that the paladins have. Everything felt very grounded in low magic, except for every now and then. All right, I got interrupted, and now I have no idea what the fuck I was talking about. Well, where was I? Was I still talking about world building, low magic world? Oh, I guess I'll talk about the Church of the Rat, because I really loved that concept, because they are, like, the healers, the lawyers, the ones who take in everybody and don't judge, and that is rats. I really, clearly, T. Kingfisher has experienced rats before in her life, because if you ever had rats, which I have, you know that they are some of the most kind, friendly, thoughtful, and wickedly intelligent creatures on the planet. Rats will be friends with anyone. They just want to be your friend. Rats have an innate sense of fairness. Scientists have, like, trapped a rat in a box where it's uncomfortable and then put another rat on the outside with some food. The rat on the outside will prioritize freeing its friend before eating the food. Like, they can learn to drive little tiny cars. Rats are the best. And so, like, it suited this world so well to have the rat as, like, this kind, thoughtful, clever god with these people. Like, the Church of the Rat doesn't keep paladins even. They have healers, they have lawyers, and their lawyers are basically public defenders. The Church of the Rat lawyers go and do lawyering for free for poor people who need it. Like, mwah, 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 mwah. There are not enough chef's kisses in the world for the Church of the Rat. Any other world building aspects that I want to bring up? I don't think so. I think that's everything. So the last thing that I will talk about is prose. How is the craft? I normally really like T. Kingfisher's style. She has a style that is fairly straightforward and not super flowery, but she can turn a phrase, let me tell you. And there were quotes from this book that will stick with me that I love. This book is very quotable. I'll share with you my favorite one if I can find it. So the quote is, "There was something about poverty that was a little like war. Either you had been there or you hadn't, and it wasn't really possible to explain it to anyone who hadn't." Oof, that hit me right in the frickin' diaphragm, because yes, as someone who was extremely poor growing up, I have never met anyone who wasn't, who I could, like, adequately explain it to. Right in my soul. And there were so many great quotes like that in the book. And again, Kingfisher's style might not be for everybody, but it works for me. Kingfisher usually doesn't feel the need to repeat herself. She lets a scene be a scene and doesn't, like, beleaguer. She trusts, in previous books that I've read, she is good at trusting her reader to keep up. She's like, keep up. And I'm like, on it, ma'am. I am right there with you. In this book, though, her prose just on a crunchy level were not as good. Just her writing on a line-by-line level. While there were all of these snappy quotes in there, they were buried in some not very good writing, in my opinion. It was just swimming in, like, word repetition in the same sentences. And clunky sentences, too. And I'm like, what is going on? Because you would have these amazing quotes that were just, like, just made your brain go brr. But at the same time, they were couched in some, in my opinion, not very good writing. It was weird. It was a weird experience because it wasn't, like, sometimes it would be exactly what I expected from T. Kingfisher, and sometimes it was like, is this one of her older works? Like, is this older and she's gotten better? Or was she just maybe not trying as hard? Or did the editors not help as much with this one because it's romance? And sadly, there does seem to be a sort of who cares attitude about romance. Like, people will read it anyway. It doesn't have to be good. It's romance, which I don't love. Romance readers deserve well-edited books. But I'm like curious why I found her actual craft so much worse in Paladin's Grace than I have found it in even her earlier works. Like, I think Thornhedge is an earlier one, and I liked that. Prose-wise, it wasn't amazing. It wasn't perfect, obviously. But I liked it better than the craft in this, and that's weird. And I just don't know what happened. I kept getting brought out of the story that I was struggling to enjoy already by some really sloppy sentences. Looking back through the quotes, I'm reminded of a quality in Stephen that I don't like. Even though I really do like Stephen, he has an overprotective tendency that, like, made me angry. If anybody, like, hurts or wrongs Grace, and she does have people who have hurt and wronged her in her past and who have come back into her present, he is very, like, possessive and growly and, like, I am going to go rip the head off of his very violent thoughts about anybody who so much as inconvenienced Grace, honestly. And I don't like that. It creeps me out. Like, I want to love Stephen as the giant, burly cinnamon bun that he is. And then he's having thoughts like, ooh, that person looked at Grace wrong, and I want to pull his arms out of their sockets like a Wookiee. He doesn't think the Wookiee part, but you get my drift. Like, no, thank you, Stephen. That is an aspect I don't like about you. All right, so I think I'm going to be done with this very lengthy, probably, review of Paladin's Grace. I wish that I could report in that I loved it, because I wanted to love it. I'm not giving up on Kingfisher, because her record so far is still in her favor very strongly with me liking her books, but I don't think I'm going to continue with this Paladin series. It is too heavily leaning towards romance, and from what my friends tell me, the horniness is throughout, and I just can't relate to, like, super horny characters. Yep, I can't relate to a romance-driven, at least a majority, by horniness. So, yes, I will keep reading Kingfisher's books and keep trying to find ones that I love, but the Paladin series, unfortunately, is gonna go by the wayside for me. So, have you read this book? What did you think about it? Have you read the rest of the series? Tell me what you thought down below. I don't know if you'll convince me to read the rest of the series, but were any of them, like, less horny? Were any of them more plot-focused? Were any of them, like, where the characters had a more reasonable obstacle between them, aside from, we're too dumb to have a conversation? I'm a communicator. In my life, I'm a communicator. If I have a thought or a feeling, I'm gonna tell you. I'm not gonna make you figure it out. I'm not gonna make you wait and puzzle over what's Julian thinking? What does Julian think of me? I'm just gonna tell you. So it drives me crazy when characters will not talk. Infuriating. Anyway, thank you for watching. Don't forget that I have books that you can purchase now. I even have a fantasy romance. If you want to check out how I do with fantasy romance, you can go ahead and check that out. If you want to leave a scathing review, that is your right. I also have a Patreon where you can support me and help me self-publish my own books. And honestly, right now, just keep this channel running, because I think YouTube changed something again, and so I've been suffering in the algorithm real bad, and also it has just not been paying out. Like, it was paying me pennies on the dollar before, and now it's, like, barely. So if you want to help me out, Patreon's a good way. Also, I do have channel membership now on my YouTube, so if you want to see all of the exclusive videos that patrons are getting to see and have been getting to see for a while, come and become one of my channel members if you don't want the hassle of, like, going over to Patreon. You can go ahead and do that. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see all of you again next time with whatever it is I happen to be doing next time. Bye!